In the echoing corridors of Buckingham Palace, a secret is growing louder, and it's shaking the monarchy to its core. Behind the towering gates and immaculate facades lies a truth so fragile, even the royal walls seem to tremble under its weight. To the public, everything appears polished and precise, a seamless continuation of Britain's centuries-old legacy. But deep inside the palace, where power and privacy collide, the image of a strong and steady crown has begun to fracture. The United Kingdom watches with hopeful eyes, believing the transition from Queen Elizabeth II to King Charles III has been one of grace and control. What they don't see is the storm quietly gathering behind the royal curtain. At 76, King Charles shoulders the unimaginable pressure of a role he waited for his entire life. For decades, he stood as the heir apparent, a man destined to inherit a throne wrapped in tradition and expectation. But when that moment finally arrived, it was not accompanied by triumph, it came with a ticking clock. No one, not even Charles himself, could have foreseen the chain reaction that would unfold after his coronation. What began as a reign promising renewal and modern monarchy quickly darkened into something far more uncertain. The same public that once questioned whether Charles was fit to lead now wonders how long he can endure. The first ripple of concern spread quietly, a brief, unexplained absence from a public event. Then came the headlines. King Charles had been hospitalized. At first, it was framed as a precaution, a routine check. But those inside the palace knew better. The king's health, once a tightly held secret, had reached a point where silence could no longer shield the truth. Behind the palace gates, whispers became warnings. The monarch was battling more than just the weight of the crown, he was in a fight for time itself. For over a year, Charles had been pushing through grueling treatment for a disease the palace refused to name. An unspecified form of cancer had gripped him quietly, invading not just his body, but his reign. Even as the public smiled at his appearances, few realized the toll it was taking. He had been in treatment for nearly 60 weeks, enduring it all with a stoicism that mirrored his late mother. Yet unlike Queen Elizabeth, whose steady presence anchored the nation for 70 years, Charles has been marked by something different: urgency. An urgency to lead, to prove himself, to justify the decades he waited in the shadows. That urgency became his burden. Despite his condition, Charles refused to slow down. Reports from palace aides paint a disturbing picture. A man who cannot step away from his desk, who works from early morning until midnight, who takes only a single hour off each week, Sunday at 11 a.m. during church. His addiction to duty is more than royal discipline. It borders on obsession. Camilla has pleaded with him to rest. Friends have urged him to ease his schedule, yet nothing changes. Buckingham Palace, once a symbol of poise and calm, has become a pressure cooker, fueled by one man's unrelenting drive to serve even as his body begins to betray him. Now, a quiet anxiety hangs over the monarchy. Every time Charles appears in public, he looks more fragile. Every step, every wave, every brief smile is examined for signs. Is he still strong enough? How much longer can he carry the crown before it carries him? These questions remain unspoken in official circles, yet they echo through every hallway of the palace. For all the public reverence and royal protocol, this is still a family, and one man, more than anyone, watches the king with growing dread. But as King Charles pushes through the pain, one man watches helplessly: his son, Prince William. Behind his composed face, Prince William hides a pain the cameras never capture. To the world, he's the face of royal strength, dutiful, poised, and polished. But behind palace walls, he is a son caught in a slow-burning nightmare. The pressure of preparing for the throne has always loomed large, but now it comes with something more brutal: the potential loss of his father, not just as a king, but as the man who raised him under the shadow of a crown. As the heir, William stands at the intersection of hope and heartbreak, clinging to the legacy he's destined to inherit while silently fearing the price it may demand. King Charles's relentless commitment to royal duty has become a double-edged sword. William has watched, day after day, as his father defies medical warnings and continues to exhaust himself with back-to-back engagements and late-night paperwork. It's not admiration that fills the prince's heart anymore, it's fear. Charles's schedule has become a self-imposed punishment, an endless loop of responsibility that no longer seems noble, but reckless. Doctors may offer treatment, advisors may give warnings, but the king listens to no one. His addiction to duty has become as unshakable as the monarchy itself, and William is left wondering if this obsession will ultimately be what ends him. Camilla has tried and failed to intervene. Despite her influence, she's found herself unable to penetrate Charles's stubborn resolve. Her appeals to lighten his burden have fallen on deaf ears. Privately, she has confided in royal aides that she's exhausted, not from the demands of her title, but from the battle she's lost with the man she loves. William, too, has pleaded in his own quiet way. Unlike his stepmother, he chooses discretion, whispers to private secretaries, subtle rearrangements of schedules, carefully worded messages passed through trusted aides. He's not just a prince watching a monarch deteriorate, he's a son trying to protect what little time they may have left. And yet, William carries the weight of another impossible question. Is it time to step forward? As his father weakens, his own role intensifies. Every decision Charles refuses to delegate is another burden William may soon inherit. But how do you prepare to lead when you're not ready to say goodbye? That's the question that haunts him in the quiet hours, far from the cameras and titles. He's lived his entire life under the expectation that one day he'd be king. But no one told him that day might come through heartbreak, not celebration. But the king's refusal to slow down wasn't just a personal choice. It became a national dilemma. Even cancer can't stop him. King Charles lives by one rule: work until the crown falls. For most men, illness is a warning sign, an unmistakable call to slow down, to pause, to heal. But for Charles, the diagnosis didn't signal retreat. It became fuel, a silent challenge to prove that no sickness, no frailty, no shadow of mortality could ever strip him of the role he waited nearly a lifetime to fulfill. While the nation whispers about his health, the king refuses to listen. He answers only to his own sense of duty, an obsession that's quickly becoming dangerous. Inside Buckingham Palace, staff members live by an unspoken rule: don't expect rest. The only guaranteed moment of peace is 11 a.m. on Sundays, when Charles is at church. Every other hour, from dawn until deep into the night, is fair game. Phone calls at midnight, paperwork by 6 a.m., back-to-back briefings, and endless correspondence. This is the rhythm of a monarch who believes time is running out, and he must race it. One insider confessed he doesn't understand downtime. It simply doesn't exist in his world. That world, structured entirely around work, has become both his armor and his prison. The recent hospitalization shook the palace. But what disturbed Charles wasn't the illness, it was the interruption. Being confined, even briefly, made him restless, frustrated, and visibly agitated. It wasn't the cancer that rattled him, it was the reality of being forced to stop. Friends close to the king say that he doesn't feel like a monarch when he's not working. If he's not signing, speaking, deciding, or leading, then in his mind, he's failing. That mindset, that relentless standard, is what drives him and what may ultimately destroy him. Camilla, the woman who knows him best, has pleaded with him to slow down, not once, but over and over. Behind closed doors, she's voiced her desperation. She's seen the fatigue in his eyes, the silent strain beneath the royal composure. And yet, nothing changes. No matter how many warnings, how many gentle pleas, Charles pushes on. Her efforts have failed, not because she lacks influence, but because Charles has wrapped his identity so tightly around his role that stepping back feels like surrender. To him, rest is weakness, and weakness has no place on the throne. This is more than just stubbornness. It's psychological warfare fought within a man who spent his life waiting for this crown. The years of preparation, the decades of shadowing, his mother's legacy have hardened into a mission that overrides logic. To Charles, every moment off the job is a missed opportunity to prove he's worthy. But the question now looming is chilling. What happens when his body gives out before he's willing to let go? Because while he fights to serve, his health is already fighting back, and the clock refuses to be ignored. And soon, the pressure of this relentless pace would lead to a shocking health revelation. For months, the royal press stayed quiet. But the truth couldn't be hidden forever. Whispers became questions, and questions turned into suspicion. Why had the king vanished from the spotlight for weeks at a time? Why had certain public engagements been quietly cancelled or passed on to other senior royals without explanation? Beneath the polished surface of Buckingham Palace, a deeply guarded truth was unraveling, and it had already been unfolding for well over a year. The king had been undergoing treatment for cancer, a brutal 15-month battle that was deliberately kept from the public eye. And for 15 months, that secret was carefully managed with precision, silence, and misdirection. The palace's strategy was clear: protect the image, preserve the crown. While loyalists praised his resilience, few understood the full extent of what was happening behind closed doors. For nearly a year and a half, the royal family and its communications machine managed to avoid the one word that would have shaken the nation: cancer. Instead, they referred to it as an undisclosed health issue, routine procedures, or complications. It wasn't until March of 2025, after a brief yet alarming hospitalization, that the word could no longer be avoided. The public was finally told what many insiders had feared for months. King Charles III was in an ongoing battle with a serious and unspecified form of cancer, and he had been for far longer than anyone knew. The hospitalization itself was short, but the implications were massive. Though the king was discharged within days, those who witnessed the situation firsthand knew the stakes had changed. Sources inside the medical wing spoke of sudden fatigue, unsteadiness, and episodes of disorientation. What was once a private struggle was now entering a dangerous phase, one that could no longer be concealed. In recent public appearances, the signs were undeniable. A slight tremble in his hand, a loss of weight that became harder to disguise, brief but noticeable pauses in his speeches, moments of distraction that once would have been dismissed, now seen in a chilling new light. Insiders from the palace's inner medical circle confirmed what Buckingham Palace refused to say aloud: fainting spells, dizziness, sharp drops in energy. The king was deteriorating, not rapidly, but unmistakably. And no matter how much he tried to keep up the illusion of control, his body was no longer obeying. While the public clung to his every move with curiosity and reverence, doctors were issuing quiet warnings, warnings that no one wanted to hear, but everyone feared were true. Time, they whispered, was beginning to slip. Yet no formal statement was issued beyond the carefully crafted press release. No timelines were offered, no details about the treatment plan, just silence again. But this time, it felt heavier. This time, it felt final. Because while the king fought to maintain the image of stability, a darker question was emerging. Could the monarchy survive if the crown fell too soon? And with each passing day, the weight of the throne begins to crush, not just the king, but the future of the monarchy. She made a vow at 25 and kept it for 70 years. Now, that shadow haunts Charles. When Queen Elizabeth II placed the crown on her head in 1953, she did more than accept the throne. She sealed a lifelong contract with her country, a promise to serve until her final breath. And she kept it, unwavering, through wars, scandals, and personal tragedies. Her quiet strength became the gold standard of monarchy. She never faltered, never flinched. For Charles, that legacy is no longer just history, it's a haunting mirror, reflecting everything he's struggling to live up to. Because when he stood before the world at Westminster Abbey in 2023 and repeated the same solemn oath, he believed he would do the same. But the weight of his mother's legacy now crushes him with a force he never imagined. His coronation wasn't a celebration, it was a reckoning. After waiting longer than any heir in British history, Charles finally became king at 74. But instead of stepping into his destiny, he walked into an impossible comparison. Every move he makes is measured against a woman who reigned for a lifetime. Every decision is dissected through the lens of tradition she upheld without question. Unlike Elizabeth, who ruled with stoic detachment, Charles leads with feeling. He's not cold, he's not calculating, he's exposed. And that vulnerability, once praised for its humanity, has now become his greatest conflict. Because while his heart aches, the crown demands silence. The pressure is more than public. It's personal. Charles isn't just trying to protect an institution, he's trying to honor his mother. But how do you do that when your body is breaking beneath the same burden she carried with grace for 7 decades? How do you continue to project strength when every day brings new weakness? The private war raging inside him is more brutal than any tabloid could ever print. On one hand, the duty to stay. On the other, the very real fear that his presence may soon become a liability to the stability his mother worked so hard to preserve. He knows the eyes of the world are watching. Some expect him to endure, to be just as unshakable as Elizabeth. Others whisper that it may be time to consider the unthinkable, an early abdication. But to Charles, stepping down would feel like betrayal. Not just to the crown, but to the woman who raised him to believe that service has no expiration. And yet, continuing comes at a cost his mother never had to pay, serving while visibly deteriorating, suffering while smiling, leading while falling apart from the inside out. But now, Charles is faced with a decision his mother never had to make, and the consequences will shake the royal line. The monarchy's future no longer rests on history. It now depends on a ticking clock. For centuries, the crown has weathered war, scandal, abdication, and revolution, emerging each time as a symbol of continuity. But now, it stands on far shakier ground, not because of outside threats, but because of what's happening within its most guarded walls. As King Charles's health continues to deteriorate, Britain is no longer asking if change is coming. It's asking when. And more importantly, whether the institution is truly ready for it. Whispers of uncertainty have turned into full-blown concern. Behind parliamentary doors and within royal offices, contingency plans are being quietly drafted. The question dominating every private conversation among insiders is chilling in its simplicity. What happens if the king can't continue? With his public appearances becoming increasingly rare and his visible strength waning, Britain finds itself in a dangerous gray zone, still under the leadership of a monarch whose presence is more ceremonial by the day, while real decisions are being debated behind the scenes. Political leaders have begun preparing not just for transition, but for upheaval. Because this isn't just about a changing of the guard, it's about holding together a centuries-old structure while its very foundation starts to fracture. Amid this quiet panic, one figure has emerged as the public's emotional anchor, Prince William. While his father battles in silence, William has stepped forward, not with grand speeches or symbolic gestures, but with calm, unwavering presence. Every time he's seen in public, approval ratings spike. Every appearance, every statement, every glance seems to reassure a country desperate for stability. He's no longer just the future king, he's become the present voice of reason. A symbol of continuity in a storm, where tradition no longer feels like enough. And the public has noticed. So have politicians. So has the palace. Inside the royal court, aides have begun reshaping protocol. Certain briefings that once went exclusively to the king are now being duplicated for William. Foreign diplomats have quietly increased their engagement with the Prince of Wales. And longtime royal advisors, those who once pledged allegiance solely to Charles, have begun pivoting, subtly but unmistakably, toward the man most likely to inherit the throne sooner than planned. No one dares say it aloud, but the writing is on the wall. The monarchy is already beginning to shift, even before the crown changes hands. And yet, it's the silence that speaks loudest. No official statement. No confirmation of what insiders already know. Just a growing unease and a slow, invisible countdown. Because despite centuries of tradition, no one can escape time. And in Buckingham Palace, time is moving fast. Each day without Charles in the public eye adds weight to the rumors. Each new report from unnamed sources further tightens the knot in the nation's collective stomach. The illusion of certainty is cracking. The kingdom waits, not for a ceremony, but for clarity. Because the question isn't just when the transition will come, it's whether the monarchy will survive it intact. And while the nation speculates, Prince William receives the news that changes everything. He held back the tears for months, but this time, he couldn't. The weight had been building in silence, layered behind duty, composure, and rehearsed royal smiles. But when the message reached him, when the words were spoken out loud in a voice far too calm to match their meaning, something in Prince William shattered. Behind closed doors, without cameras, without advisors, without a script to follow, he stood not as the future king, but as a son. And in that moment, the pain he'd buried for the sake of the crown surged to the surface with brutal force. Insiders say the news came quietly, shared in the most private of settings. Charles's condition, they told him, had worsened. It wasn't just exhaustion or side effects. It was progression. The cancer had advanced in a way that changed everything. William didn't speak. He simply listened, nodding through words that barely registered. The man who had always stood between him and the throne, the one person who truly understood the unbearable cost of royalty, was slipping away. It wasn't just grief that hit him, it was terror. Not of the title he would inherit, but of the silence that would follow. The silence of losing another parent before he was ready to say goodbye. Just days later, he appeared at a public engagement. And while the cameras captured a composed, articulate prince, those who looked closer saw something else. A stillness in his eyes, a pause in his voice, a heaviness in his movements. One aide later confessed, "He's trying to stay strong, but it's tearing him up." And they were right. William had always carried the burden of expectations. But this was different. This was personal. This was heartbreak veiled in protocol. He was standing in front of the world while quietly watching it fall apart. The parallels to his mother were impossible to ignore. The suddenness, the helplessness, the public composure that masked private anguish. He had been just a boy when he lost Diana. And now, as a man, he was facing the same unimaginable truth, that he might lose his father before he could truly tell him everything he needed to say. The guilt, the love, the pride, all trapped in a space where timing is never promised. For William, the past and present had collided in a way he could no longer control. The boy who walked behind his mother's coffin was now a man staring down the inevitable loss of his father and the terrifying rise of his own reign. Yet even in sorrow, something inside him shifted. Because with pain came clarity, and with clarity came purpose. He knew what this moment meant. It was no longer just about preparing. It was about carrying forward, not just the crown, but everything his father had fought to hold on to. He wasn't ready. He didn't want it, not like this. But readiness didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the world was watching, and more importantly, Charles was still here, still fighting, still watching him. And William would not let him down. But in the midst of sorrow, William knows one truth. his father's story isn't over yet. With the world watching, King Charles makes one final choice that could change everything. Behind the grandeur of royal tradition and centuries of inherited power, a man frail, proud, and quietly aware of time slipping through his fingers begins to confront the most difficult decision of his reign. In private conversations with palace officials, there have been whispers. Not just about the cancer, not just about the treatments, but about something far more defining: succession. For the first time since wearing the crown, Charles has begun discussing what comes next. And for the monarchy, that conversation could alter its future forever. While the public speculates, William prepares. Not with declarations or fanfare, but in the quiet, calculated way of someone who knows that change does not ask permission. It arrives unannounced. He's already begun stepping into more public roles, more speeches, more diplomatic engagements, more visibility. It isn't coincidence, it's orchestration. The torch is being passed not with ceremony, but with necessity. And William, despite the weight of grief still heavy in his chest, is stepping forward because he must. The very legacy he once observed from afar is now being handed to him in real time through a transition that may come not with celebration, but with heartbreak. There's a sacred line that runs from Queen Elizabeth to Charles, and now to William. It's a line etched not just in crowns and scepters, but in sacrifice. Elizabeth served with silence. Charles served with urgency. William, now, must serve with strength, but not just for tradition's sake, for survival. The British monarchy no longer moves in a world where loyalty is guaranteed. The public is divided. Some believe Charles should continue to prove he can endure like his mother. Others plead for him to step aside for the sake of the monarchy, for the sake of dignity, and above all, for the sake of truth. The truth that his strength, once praised, is now fading. And as all eyes turn to the future, the image that lingers is not one of grandeur or authority, but of a father, a man holding together the legacy he spent his life preparing for, while watching his son prepare to protect it. Charles no longer stands alone as king. He now stands beside a prince ready to lead, but aching not to lose his father in the process. That contrasts the man who waited a lifetime to rule, and the son forced to carry on before he's ready, now defines the monarchy more than any crown ever could. William is no longer just the next in line. He is the guardian of a kingdom at the edge of transformation. He has watched, learned, and suffered. And now, as the curtain begins to fall on his father's reign, he is not just preparing to inherit the throne, he's preparing to defend it with everything he has, because when history calls again, it will be William's turn to answer. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.